Hello and welcome to the latest update of the What If interactive wargame campaign that we're running here at the Battle of Prestonpans Museum in Scotland. Now, as usual, it's been our Facebook followers who've determined the strategic decisions for the Jacobite army, and it's been a closed group of redcoat reenactors from the Edinburgh City Guard who've been determining the British Army's actions. There's been plenty happening, but before we get stuck into the campaign, I'd just like to say a thank you to all of those who've been following us so far. Thank you for spreading the word. Thanks for all your likes and your comments. It's great to have you with us, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty more of interest to come. We ended our last video, of course, with the Jacobite victory at the Third Battle of Dunbar, a victory which left Prince Charlie in possession of the field, in possession of his enemy's camp and baggage and artillery, but which had failed to totally destroy Marshal Wade's forces. Even though they were driven back to the border, Marshal Wade took 3 battalions of regulars intact and another half battalion that managed to gather together on the road from the survivors of broken units. In fact, Jacobite losses during the battle were so high he was stranded for almost a week whilst the prince was recovering his losses and sending for reinforcements from the garrisons of Stirling and Edinburgh. After that, however, it was time to get the campaign moving again. A quick look then at the campaign map reminds us of the Jacobite options in the wake of their victory at Dunbar. They could have withdrawn to Edinburgh and adopted a defensive posture, or they could have taken the road to Carlisle, where a very small garrison was sitting behind the walls, or they could follow in the wake of Marshal Wade's retreating forces and head towards the strongly defended city of Newcastle. Strongly defended perhaps, but strategically and economically very significant to the enemy. It was also, now that the prince was in Dunbar, closer than Carlisle. And all the time, the Duke of Cumberland is watching what the Jacobites might do next as he's moving his forces out of London towards the north. Now, when it was put to the vote, the Jacobite Council determined that it would take a bold approach, that it would march all of the Jacobite forces directly on Newcastle, hoping to capitalise on the successes they've had so far, trap Marshal Wade and hopefully destroy him before Cumberland was able to reach him. The fear, if they went the other way, was that Wade had enough forces to go north and create difficulty, or potentially to shadow the Jacobite advance into England and cause them problems along the line of the march. Certainly, we don't want Wade and Cumberland to join forces because that would tip the balance in favour of the Redcoats. So we have our Jacobite army marching on Newcastle, and we have Cumberland's army marching north towards them, although still some distance off. Marshal Wade, meanwhile, with the survivors of the Battle of Dunbar, is falling back on Newcastle and preparing for a defence. Now the winter is really starting to bite and there's heavy snowfall, meaning that it's very difficult for the Jacobites, especially encumbered as they are with artillery and baggage, to move on the inland routes that go over much higher ground. Easier to take the coast road towards Newcastle. But across the border, defending the Tweed crossing, is BERWICK-UPON-TWEED, a heavily fortified town and the bastion against the Scots for so many centuries. But after the Battle of Dunbar back in September, the garrison and the supplies at Berwick had been stripped in favour of defending Newcastle. So there's only a small garrison here, but nevertheless, the Jacobites have to take it if they don't want a threat to their rear and if they want to use this fortifiable defensive position as a supply depot for their Siege of Newcastle. Now, the walls of BERWICK-UPON-TWEED, for those of you who've never had the pleasure of seeing them, are substantial bastioned defences built in the late Tudor period. They're significant, they're difficult to get through, and of course, they're only as good as the garrison that's holding them. So I've zoomed in on our 18th century plan of BERWICK-UPON-TWEED, and this is the area that's going to comprise the landscape of our engagement. Here is the old line of the medieval defences, which were abandoned after the later ones were developed. The ruins of the once mighty castle there, dominating the south side of the battlefield. There's an area of suburbs, you might put it, there in the no man's land between the old and new defences, and of course, where the garrison will be based, the 2 bastions either side of the Scots Gate. That gateway is the target for our Jacobites, who will be coming down the main road straight towards the Scots Gate, even as the main road does today. So if we transfer that onto the gaming table, here we have the old medieval walls, complete with the belfry. Then we have the ruins of the castle down at the southern anchor, the area of suburbs in the middle. We have the garrison mounted on the Tudor bastions, and we have our Jacobite approach road straight towards the Scots Gate. Now our garrison is very meagre inside the walls of Berwick, just a company of invalid soldiers, old soldiers deemed unfit for the march and therefore left behind by first Johnny Cope and then by Marshal Wade, as the British armies have come and gone during the course of the campaign so far. Nevertheless, they are supported by guns mounted onto the bastions, and these being modern artillery defences, it is possible that they could inflict some heavy casualties on the Jacobites if they rush into an unfavourable position. So, despite the small garrison, this is a formidable obstacle to the Jacobite army, and the prince is determined it has to be taken quickly and efficiently so that his main army can march through Berwick, use it as a depot, and secure the bridge into England. Now, the task of taking Berwick has been given to the Duke of Perth, and he's brought a division comprising John Roy Stuart's regiment, freshly out of the garrison at Edinburgh Castle, to replace some of those men lost during the Third Battle of Dunbar. He's got a battalion of the Athol Brigade, he has the Clancameron, and he has the Foot Guards of the Earl of Kilmarnock's. Now, his intention is to try and take the town by storm as quickly as possible, using the slopes of the old defences and the suburbs forward of the main defences as cover as he prepares his attack. Initially, the rolls are in fact a little bit unfavourable for the Duke of Perth. He manages to throw John Roy Stuart out onto his left to start drawing the fire of the garrison away from the centre. He then hopes to advance the centre, the Camerons to rush the gates with petards, whilst on his right he sends the Athol Brigade out with the Foot Guards to draw the fire from the other bastion. Unfortunately, the right is delayed, leaving the centre and the left exposed to the garrison's fire. Eventually, the right does get moving, but a lucky shot from the garrison does disorder the Kilmarnock Foot Guards, leaving the Athol Brigade to rush forwards with their ladders without support. Perth doesn't want to take too many casualties out on the flanks because they are just diversions. He's really hoping to take the town by storm after blowing the gates open with the Clancameron. And so these men in the centre, rushing up through the suburbs, are going to be the crucial part of the Jacobite attack. Luckily for the Duke of Perth, his centre has some very successful orders. They're able to rush in columns straight up the main road and get to the Scots Gate, planting their petards. But as they wait, lighting their fuses, hoping to blow the gate, they are a dream for the artillery crews on those flanking bastions. And exactly as they're designed to do, those flanking guns open up on the column of the Clancameron, blasting into their sides and inflicting quite heavy casualties and disordering them as they wait to see what damage their petards will do. Badly shaken by the guns and by musket fire from the garrison on the walls above, nevertheless, despite having to take a break test, the unit holds. And then, at last, the gates are blown. The petards blow successfully, the Clancameron move through, and coming up in support is John Roy Stuart's regiment. This is bad news for the garrison, of course, because once the Jacobites are inside the town, it's going to be very hard for that single company of invalids to do anything to stop them. So in stream the clansmen, and behind them John Roy Stuart's regiment coming up in support, the Duke urging them through, himself leading by a somewhat impressive example. And just to make certain of a good thing, whilst the centre is breaking through the gate, the Athol battalion is able to get its ladders against the bastion walls and get over onto the parapet that way. And therefore, with the Jacobites over the walls or through the walls in two different locations, it's impossible for the tiny garrison to hold, and the Jacobite soldiers stream onto the streets of BERWICK-UPON-TWEED. Prince Charles Edward Stuart arrives at Berwick the following day and finds it's his own men lining the walls, and there is nothing now to stop him entering England, crossing the Tweed and marching south to Newcastle. It had been a dramatic, very rapid victory, catching the small garrison by surprise, and although it had nearly cost the Jacobites a regiment, they had held their nerve and got through the battle without any significant losses. Meanwhile, Marshal Wade and the survivors of the Third Battle of Dunbar have successfully reached the walls of Newcastle upon Tyne. There they had enough time to decide what to do next before the Jacobites could come and threaten them. They were given a choice either of attempting to hold a delaying action in the suburbs leading to the town, or they could slight the defences and march away, hoping to link up with the Duke of Cumberland further south. The Prince sent a summons demanding their surrender, but this was declined, and the decision was taken that they would hold the walls of Newcastle in the hope that they could pin the Jacobite army there for long enough for Cumberland to come up in their rear. All that remained to be done was for Wade and his soldiers to dismantle as many of the houses in the area outside the city as they possibly could to deny shelter to the approaching Jacobites when they got here. And so the stage is set for the next phase of our campaign, the dramatic events of the Siege of Newcastle, which begins on the 4th of December, 1745. Now, historically, the Jacobite army would have been reaching Derby at this point in the campaign, but instead they're now laying siege to the formidable walls of one of England's most important cities, and the Duke of Cumberland's army is marching close up to their rear. For centuries, the walls and castle of Newcastle upon Tyne have defied the best efforts of many a Scottish army. But just over 100 years before our Jacobites have got there, the city was successfully stormed and breached by a Covenanter army from north of the border. So will Charles Edward Stuart and his Jacobites be able to repeat that feat? Now, the city walls had by and large been patched up by the early 18th century, largely in response to the Jacobite threats that have come before, and so there is still a continuous circuit of defences around the greater part of the city, although there are, as you can also see, areas of development beyond the circuit walls. The River Tyne is, of course, protecting the southern approach across a single bridge. There have been other developments, though, as the city has begun to expand, and some new ports have been knocked into the walls to provide more convenient access for the civilians. This is a prosperous and significant place, and it is not going to go down without a fight. Now, fortunately for Marshal Wade, the Jacobites don't have the strength to be able to completely surround Newcastle, so they're going to focus their attentions on this quarter of the defences. This is the Westgate area. Here is the city wall, the Westgate itself, and then the wall continuing around here. There's another little postern gate there, put in about 1705 to provide convenient access to the area around the Fourth Tavern, an area of pleasure grounds and a bowling green. Other important locations within our landscape, there's open space and gardens around the former monastic settlement at the Blackfriars there. There's an open area of gardens here behind Westgate Street, all leading up to St John's Church there. Now, of course, it's no small challenge to try and turn a city like Newcastle into a tabletop landscape, but we have done our best. Here is the Durham Tower, which is there still standing today, replicated on our tabletop there on the right, and mounted with a number of cannon. And although it's been long since demolished, we've used this illustration of the West Gate itself to recreate the port through which the Jacobites might wish to funnel their attacks if they get the opportunity. Just to give you an easier sense of alignment, I've turned our map of Newcastle upside down so you can see it. The circuit wall coming here, there's the fourth postern, the continuing wall, the West Gate, the continuing wall, the Durham Tower, and the wall going on through Blackfriars. Likewise, we've got a postern gate on our model, running through to the West Gate here, coming through to the Durham Tower, and the wall continuing along. The open area around Blackfriars we have also got represented in here, a space into which the battle might flow should those walls be breaches, and likewise the open gardens behind Westgate are there behind the houses too. And looking at it from the outside of the city, looking at the West Gate in the centre of the map and the Durham Tower off to the left, looking down Westgate Street towards St John's Church, Blackfriars off to the left. And that's the view that Charles Edward Stuart has of the city walls when he first arrives with his cavalry vanguard outside the city walls on the 4th of December. Immediately, the Jacobites begin bringing up their supplies and artillery, coming into the area where the suburbs have been cleared by the British forces as they withdrew into the city. The Redcoats can do little more at this stage than watch as the Jacobite army files into view, its supplies and its artillery train moving out to select the best spots for their batteries. Then, as the sun begins to go down, from the summit of the Pink Tower near the 4th Postern, a single cannon fires its defiance, the first shot of the Siege of Newcastle. Now, unlike the previous sieges at Stirling and Edinburgh, the Jacobites cannot afford to take their time here at Newcastle. This is a tough nut to crack, the biggest garrison and the strongest urban defences the Jacobites have encountered, but there is also a large army coming up to its relief, and it is going to be a nail-biting race to see whether Cumberland can reach Newcastle in time to relieve it, or whether the Jacobites are going to have to risk a costly assault on the walls to try and secure the city and secure their rear before turning to face a battle in the open field. There's lots still to play for. It really feels like this campaign is coming to some form of climax. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of updates coming in the next few weeks as this siege progresses and Cumberland's forces inch their way closer through the snow and ice towards battle. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the update. You're now up to speed with where our armies are and what they've been doing, and I can assure you it's not going to be too long before we produce the next video, because this siege is going to progress quickly, and of course the stakes have never been higher. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.